Well, as I noted, it was a busy week while Parliament was away, with the focus last Friday not so much here in Ottawa, but in Washington, D.C., where the U.S. Supreme Court struck down Donald Trump's so-called IEEPA tariffs. Now, in Canada's case, those were the first round of tariffs applied on this country in response to a fentanyl crisis which Donald Trump accused Canada of fueling. But even with the IEEPA tariffs gone, Canadian officials are not celebrating in the streets, in part because other sectoral tariffs have hit this country harder, and no one takes for granted how chaotic and unpredictable the Trump White House can be.
Fortunate that we aren't affected as of right now, but things change on a daily basis, as everyone knows. President Trump could wake up and, a couple options. We move forward and we get a deal, or he might blow up the Kuzma deal.
Well, to talk about last week's ruling on Trump's IEEPA tariffs is Matthew Leffler. Matthew is a lawyer and adjunct professor of law at Michigan State University, also the host of the Armchair Attorney Podcast, which, Matthew, I listened to last Friday. Good to see you again. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me back. It's always a pleasure to be here and talk about some of the most important lawsuits in America and probably the world.
Yeah, well, certainly in Canada's case, it affects this economy quite strongly, greatly. The U.S. president, though, he was visibly upset by the tariff ruling that was handed down by the U.S. Supreme Court last Friday. And I was listening to some of the commentary over the weekend, with some commentators pointing out that tariffs have long been a cornerstone of Trump's economic beliefs, even before the second term. Talk to us about that. What do you know of that?
Well, we know exactly what's happened after the IEEPA tariffs were knocked down. Trump announced Section 122 tariffs initially at 10%, now at 15%. And those are going to be in place, I believe, for 150 days. There may be challenges to those, but the reality is President Trump has looked at the United States economy and said trade deficits is something he can't sustain. He wants to see some transition there, maybe to encourage domestic manufacturing, but ultimately tariffs are a tax paid by the importers, and that's something that trickles down eventually. And this particular use of IEEPA was something never done before. And finally, we have some clarity as of Friday about what the future looks like. But as you mentioned, make no mistake, there are going to be tariffs in the future, and they're tariffs now, and they're just not going to be under IEEPA.
Okay, so I'll pick up on that point in a second, but trade deficits you outline as a prime motivator here for Donald Trump. But how much of this is just trying to collect revenues to pay down the national debt in the United States?
Well, the national debt is something that a lot of my generation and many of the people I work with think about pretty often. It's not something that we have a real solution to. Whether tariffs were ever going to be used to pay off the debt is something totally different, or whether it's going to have the deficit, another question that's kind of out there. Right now, all of this revenue has come in under IEEPA, and it's hundreds of billions of dollars. This may have to be returned to the importers that ended up bringing stuff in under that regime. So we're not seeing the end of this, and it's only going to accelerate over the weeks and months to come.
Mm-hmm. Now, you referenced the global tariffs, and those were bumped up to 15% by Saturday by the U.S. president. Again, temporary, 150 days, as I believe the quote here, before it actually has to be voted on, by Congress to extend it? How likely do you think that will be?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So we have in America this three-legged stool. There's a judiciary, a legislative, and an executive. And the legislative branch, the one closest to the people, is the one that has the most power over raising revenue. And so when Congress decides to delegate their revenue-raising authority, there's a lot of steps in that process, a lot of things that kind of hamstring the executive. And that's by design. We want those things to happen. So yes, there's a finite duration for these new tariffs. There's a cap on how high they can be. But ultimately, as the Trump administration has shown us time and again, they fundamentally believe that the ability to use tariffs as a negotiating tactic is, essential to the executive branch. But at least with the IEEPA case, we have some guardrails in place with the existing tariff statutes, but there's no doubt more are to come.
Yeah, more are to come. Just how empowered is the president to do that, though, without Congress?
Yeah, he's got a lot of latitude. The emergency powers of the president are substantial. But what we have seen within Congress, both the House and the Senate, is some recalcitrance. Now they're starting to understand that maybe tariffs are not the most popular thing. We're going into an election year, obviously, so there will be some transitions. And tariffs domestically are not terribly popular with the broader percentage of Americans, though there are some who really do favor some form of tariffing regime, just not this massive general general like hammer that went on every single international trading partner.
Okay, so extrapolate here for me, because as I said off top, the IEEPA tariffs, at the end of the day, they only really apply to a minority of goods exported by this country to the United States. The most damaging of the tariffs right now are the sectoral tariffs on key industries like steel and auto. Does Friday's ruling have any impact or set any kind of precedent on those sectoral tariffs, which Canadians are looking at very closely?
Yeah, there is none. I mean, the IEEPA tariff case has nothing to do about the amount of tariffs raised, the type of revenue generated. It all has to do with whether or not this particular statute, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act of 1977, or IEEPA, fun to say, even more fun to explain, has never been used to raise revenue before. So that new use of this existing law is what the tariff case before SCOTUS was all about. So other tariffs that are in place, those have been litigated in the past. Those are certainly constitutional uses of the tariffing authority, though, again, maybe we still see litigation. But ultimately, nothing that happened on Friday has any impact on tariffs outside of the reciprocal tariffs that were first announced on Liberation Day a little over a year ago.
Okay. Matthew, always appreciate the insight. Thank you for this.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.